Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dr. Allison Thompson, and I am the Executive Director of the Center for Guaranteed Income Research at the School of Social Policy and Practice at the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. On behalf of the Global Income Security Network, I am pleased to welcome you to GISN's second webinar entitled Guaranteed Income as a Solution to Social Challenges: Key Findings and Policy Implications from Reforms and Experiment Results. The purpose of today's webinar is to share both study findings from researchers and lessons learned from practitioners about a select group of guaranteed income experiments and programs from various countries. Part 1 of our webinar will feature 3 presentations about possibilities for social change through guaranteed income pilot results, which will be followed by Part 2 of the webinar, highlighting policy shifts beyond the pilots, next steps to protect vulnerable populations. I want to thank the Seoul Metropolitan Government and especially Ms. Yunha Lee for organizing our webinar today and gathering our panel of esteemed colleagues. I am pleased to welcome our panel of presenters today. We will hear first from Dr. Stacia West, an associate professor at the University of Tennessee's College of Social Work. Dr. West's research focuses on universal basic income, unconditional cash transfers, women's poverty and wealth inequality, and the affordable housing crisis. Dr. West is a co-founder of the Center for Guaranteed Income Research at the University of Pennsylvania and a lead PI of the American Guaranteed Income Studies, or AMGIS. AMGIS is a cross-site mixed methods experiment designed to investigate the impact of unconditional cash transfers across more than 30 sites with nearly 19,000 participants enrolled in treatment and control groups. Today, she will be sharing findings to date across a subset of diverse AMGIS pilots in the United States, focusing on the impact of unconditional cash transfers on core outcome areas. Following Dr. West, we will hear from Dr. Sarah Cowan, an associate professor of sociology at New York University and the founder and executive director of the Cash Transfer Lab. She is a social demographer and is an expert on the universal cash transfer in Alaska, among other things. Today, Dr. Cowan will present research about the impact of the Alaska Permanent Fund dividend. Since 1982, the state of Alaska has distributed cash dividends annually from their sovereign wealth fund to every state resident. Dr. Cowan will present both findings to date, as well as information about ongoing studies examining how the dividend influences credit scores, debt repayment, and substance use. Mr. Mark Donovan will then wrap up the first part of our webinar. He is the founder and executive director of the Denver Basic Income Project. A longtime entrepreneur and social innovator, Mr. Donovan seeded the project with $500,000 of his own capital and has led the effort to raise and deploy over $10.8 million in direct cash assistance. Today, he will share key insights from the Denver Basic Income Project and will describe the project's impact, research findings, and lessons learned about trust, dignity, and stability. He will also introduce Colorado's exploratory work toward a statewide cash dividend, including modeling, polling, and revenue strategy development, illustrating how guaranteed income can evolve from a local intervention into a scalable economic policy. Dr. Pasi Moisio will begin the second part of our webinar today. Dr. Moisio is a research professor at the Finnish Institute for Health and Welfare and an associate professor at the University of Turku. Dr. Moisio has extensive experience as a social policy expert for the Finnish government and the European Union. He is currently serving as the chair of the Parliamentary Social Security Committee for the period 2020 through 2027. He will present findings from 2 large-scale experiments conducted in Finland: the Centralizing Guaranteed Minimum Income Experiment from 1997 to 1998, and the Finnish Basic Income Experiment in 2017 to 2018. He will then discuss how findings from these experiments were used to generate scaled national policy recommendations. Next, Mr. Aaron Strauss will present. Mr. Strauss is the Senior Program Manager at the Office of Community Wealth within the City of Los Angeles's Community Investment for Families Department. He oversees a portfolio of various economic empowerment programs, including several guaranteed income programs that have invested tens of millions of dollars into some of Los Angeles's most vulnerable families. Mr. Strauss will present information from LA's largest guaranteed income program, Big Leap, which provided $1,000 unconditional cash for 12 months for 3,200 families, focusing on findings from this pilot. He will then talk about the post-pilot work of his department following Big Leap, with an emphasis on a new guaranteed income program supporting 40 transition-aged youth and 40 survivors of intimate partner violence with $1,000 a month for 24 months. Finally, Ms. Yunha Lee will wrap up our webinar today. Ms. Lee is a manager within the Seoul Stepping Stone Income Division of the Welfare Office within Seoul's Metropolitan Government. Ms. Lee will focus her presentation on Seoul's post-support initiatives designed to prevent at-risk households from experiencing crises after the end of their city's income security experiment. She will explain why a soft landing approach is critical in transitioning pilot participants from Seoul's Guaranteed Income Program. Such an approach offers participants tailored service linkage, frontline case management, and employment support, designed to bridge the gap from pilot to policy. Following these presentations, we will conclude our webinar with a brief question and answer session. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. West to start the presentation portion of our webinar.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson, and also thank you to Ms. Yunha Lee and the Seoul Metropolitan Government for hosting this webinar. As Allison mentioned, I'm the co-founder of the Center for Guaranteed Income Research at the University of Pennsylvania. We're actually celebrating our 5th year as a center this fall. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about our portfolio and sort of what the key findings are. So we can go ahead to the next slide here. So our approach is to develop a common body of knowledge in the US on unconditional cash transfers. Starting with Stockton in 2017, 2018, we saw this momentum in the United States building for experimenting with unconditional cash in a number of different avenues. And so one of the things that we considered as we built out this research portfolio is that we wanted the data to be able to speak to one another. So we wanted to have sort of a unified approach measuring common outcomes across a number of different pilot sites to understand how cash works, what sort of outcomes it might produce, and how those outcomes may be disparate based on geographic location or individual demographic factors or life stage. So that's really how the center was built. We utilize a mixed methods approach, so doing both in-depth interviews as well as online surveys to capture key outcomes. We also prioritize partnerships with community-based organizations. So I'll say, while we have over 35 different sites across the United States, it's not necessarily a copy-paste type method. We work with each community to determine what is the amount, what is the duration, what are their key research questions, so that we can work alongside those communities that are vulnerable and also community leaders to develop research that's capable of speaking directly to policy. In our role at the center, we provide technical assistance for cash transfer programs. So determining what sort of supports are needed, what is the ideal sample, how are we going to recruit the sample, and what are the best methods for data collection. Of course, we know that demographically, different types of data collection are more effective than others. We also in-house conduct both quantitative and qualitative analyses, then move to meta inference and disseminate those findings in the form of presentations like this, white papers, and different manuscripts. So as I mentioned, we have over 35 different sites, most of which are centralized under this portfolio called AMGIS. So to date, you can see that we have published a number of different locations spanning across the US, from large cities like New Orleans or like Los Angeles, to rural areas like Ulster County, New York. So these reports are available on our website that folks are able to freely read. So I'm going to rewind a little bit and talk about the theory of change, or why we think in the US context that guaranteed income may be a policy tool that, alongside other policy interventions, may produce more positive outcomes for individuals that are struggling with financial insecurity. So as we know, social determinants of health, things like education, where you live, what your earnings are, what sort of employment you have, what your race or gender may be, intersects with structural injustice as well as income volatility. These all create a set of conditions that make it difficult for upward economic mobility within the US context. So with a guaranteed income infused that is both unconditional, so completely no strings attached, there's no compulsory sort of programming that a person has to be a part of, in order to receive the cash, and also that it's recurring, it's predictable. So typically on a monthly basis, we then see in the first 1 to 6 months of receiving the guaranteed income that it smooths income volatility, relieves material hardship. So folks are better able to pay for those unexpected financial shocks, those emergencies that come up, as well as better able to kind of provide for basic needs. So things like rent or a mortgage payment, or most often we see food security. So in months 1 through 6, folks are really trying to get their feet on the ground to be able to provide the day-to-day basic needs that they need to support themselves and their family. In month 6 plus, after folks have some sense of some bit of stability, we see increases in time, right? Because we know that income poverty is often time poverty. Folks are having to work multiple jobs in order to make ends meet. So as we smooth that income volatility, folks have more time to spend with their families, more time to even think about what a brighter future may look like. So we see changes starting to begin in well-being and self-determination, and it simply creates space for decision-making that is previously sort of occupied necessarily by the day-to-day survival. A lot of our work focuses on the feminization of poverty. The fact that in the US and in many places across the world, women experience poverty and wealth inequality at disproportionate rates. This is likely and most commonly because of a disproportionate share of care work that women have to are required to perform. So this leads to financial scarcity and time scarcity. Put simply, women are constantly sort of preoccupied with how is my family going to make it to the next day. And then additionally, that woman is not only working multiple jobs, but is coming home, right, to continue what is called the second shift, or that unpaid care work that we know contributes to the broader macroeconomic environment, yet remains unpaid. This takes a physical toll on women's bodies such that they're exhausted, they are stressed. And while that is certainly uncomfortable in the moment, it is severe, and then it leads to later sort of physical symptoms that individuals have. So you can see here this one individual that we interviewed saying, I felt like I was going to have a heart attack coming home. I was so tired, forced myself not to sleep so she could take care of her partner, and I pushed myself until I collapsed in my classroom. So unfortunately, this is the reality of many women that are working multiple jobs and then also having to perform that undue or unpaid care work. Additionally, we're studying how care work and time may change with the infusion of a guaranteed income. So can a guaranteed income alleviate some of that care work stress that mothers are experiencing? And so that may come in the form of being able to afford childcare, being able to afford elder care, or simply not feeling like they have to take that extra paid work and be able to spend additional time with their families. So this is redirecting time towards oneself, toward their relationships and their family and with their children. So I want to talk a little bit about third wave experimental findings. So many of the projects within AMGIS are randomized controlled trials. Those that I'm talking about today are from Santa Fe, Ulster County, Patterson, Columbia, Cambridge, the city of Los Angeles, and Birmingham, Alabama. I will say some of these findings on this slide and the next are our findings, as well as those that our partners have found. So if we think back to that theory of change, you can see positive changes in 7 of 7 sites, right? Whenever lower income households receive an infusion of cash, you typically see positive changes related to financial stability. So they're better able to handle that $400 unexpected emergency. They're more likely to be banked, more likely to have savings in that bank account. When it comes to employment, we see a positive trend toward full-time employment in 4 of 7 sites and mixed effects in 3 of the 7 sites. So while there are often consistent upticks in full-time employment, and reductions in unemployment, what we do see is a lot of shift to part-time work among mothers. We see this as a positive finding. Moms are able to choose to spend more time with their children and less time in the workforce. This is important as we think about child development and as we think about sort of the depth and attachment that we have to our children. In housing, again, with one of these material outcomes, positive trends, more secure housing, more stable housing in 6 of 7 sites, and reductions in housing cost burden or the share of monthly income that is going towards supporting rent or mortgage payments. I'll say in terms of mental and physical health, we have quite mixed effects. In 2 of 7 sites, there are positive reductions in symptoms of stress, anxiety and depression. And it's very mixed across sites for physical health. What we think is happening here is that many of these experiments only last about 1 year. So it's pretty difficult to see any changes in physical health, physical functioning or limitations due to physical disabilities in the course of 1 year. In terms of food security, as I mentioned previously, we see positive trends in 6 of 7 sites. So there's decreased worry about hunger and food scarcity, and there's increased ability to eat preferred foods. On this next slide, talk a little bit about outcomes for parents and children, and some of these findings are those that we have within the AMGIS portfolio, and others are with our colleagues across the United States that are separate studies. So Embrace Mothers in Birmingham, which provided $375 per month for single moms, reported that moms were actually funding mental health supports, things like therapists and extracurricular activities for their children. So what we saw here was that moms were actually prioritizing the mental health of their own children before they were prioritizing it for themselves, which is not necessarily a positive finding, but speaks to the prioritization that mothers have for their children. In the Baby's First Year study, which is a multi-state experiment led by Greg Duncan, Lisa Ganeshan, Catherine Magnuson, moms, what we saw there, poor self-rated health related to moving to higher opportunity neighborhoods, but there have not been significant changes yet found whenever it comes to early childhood outcomes or indicators of more positive childhood development. The Big Leap study, I won't steal those findings from Mr. Strauss, who will talk about them at length, but I will say we did do an experiment out in Los Angeles for, it was $1,000 a month over 12 months. 80% of those recipients were mothers, largely women of color and Latinas. We saw reductions in intimate partner violence, improvements in children's enrollment and extracurriculars. However, clinically insignificant effects on mental health, as I alluded to earlier, rather mixed effects on that. Additionally, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, we did an experiment with moms that were below the area median income. And the interesting thing here is that those parents that received a guaranteed income had children that were more likely to have better grades, more likely to be enrolled in AP classes, and had fewer instances of absenteeism. And this finding was quite shocking to me because it seemed quite sudden to see those changes so soon in only an 18-month pilot. But if we go back to what I was talking about in terms of time scarcity and income scarcity, what we see here is simply parents spending more time around that dinner table, doing homework, taking their kids to extracurricular activities because they have the time and a little bit of money to be able to invest in their children's enrichment and development. Also, we have a couple of experiments with formerly incarcerated individuals, those that have served their sentences and are returning back to society, in two experiments, both in Durham and in Gainesville, Florida. We saw improvements in the ability to cover emergency expenses, increases in savings, enhanced housing stability, better able to afford food, less food scarcity, some improvements in mental health, and then also in Durham, some full-time employment improvements. But most importantly, I will say, the United States has an incredibly high rate of recidivism or reoffenses that lead to re-involvement with the justice system. We have tried in the US a number of different interventions to lower rates of recidivism, though structural inequality and structural violence continues the mass incarceration of persons of color in the United States. We saw here in Gainesville a 12 percentage point reduction in recidivism over the course of only 12 months. And so this is an incredibly promising pilot as we think about the economic risks that returning citizens face that leave them at increased likelihood of returning to incarceration. So we're looking forward to a number of pieces of research that are going to be forthcoming quite soon. We have several projects, that are 3 years long, one in New York and one in Los Angeles. We're expecting results from those pilots related to maternal health and child development coming soon. Parental stress and engagement, so those time diaries, the time to care study, occurred in both or in New York, Los Angeles, and Iowa. Those will be forthcoming soon. And one of the most really exciting experiments that we have is in the state of New York, looking at the potential impacts of guaranteed income on child welfare interactions. So in this experiment, we have parents that were flagged for potential child neglect that was not substantiated. So we're following those parents over a course of time to understand whether or not guaranteed income can prevent a future flag of child neglect. And we'll end here with sort of one of these quotes from one of our participants that I think really encapsulates what is happening with guaranteed income, particularly with parents. I'm able to spend a lot more quality time with friends and loved ones. Before I received the money, I was shutting myself out from a lot of loved ones. Everything just looks a lot more positive. I'm able to look at things in a more positive way just because I have control over my time. I have this sense of like, there's nothing I can't do now.
Thank you, Dr. West. That was fantastic. We appreciate you sharing those findings with our webinar. And now we're excited to turn over to Dr. Sarah Cowan for her presentation.
So I will be speaking to you today about lessons from the Alaska Permanent Fund dividend. So Alaska is one of the newer states to the United States of America. And shortly after statehood, an oil boom happened there. And in response, Alaska established a sovereign wealth fund. And the goals of the fund were to diversify the state economy away from oil and to create a renewable resource for generations of Alaskans. And I'm going to walk through a few of the ways in which the fund works, in part because it's relevant to the research and in part to tee up Mark's presentation. So this sovereign wealth fund, you can think about it as like a mutual fund that's run by a quasi-state agency. And the revenue from that funds pays for state government, cash dividends to Alaskan residents, and reinvestments into the fund. So every fall, a cash dividend is paid to Alaskan residents. How is the size of that dividend set? Well, from 1982 to 2015, it was set by a statutory formula that the idea was to protect the dividend from the influence of politics. So it is a 10% of the average income for the last 5 years of the fund divided by the number of eligible Alaskans. So this is profit sharing in the sovereign wealth fund, and it's smoothed over 5 years. From 2016 onward, the dividend amount was set by the state legislature and subject to veto by the governor. That means that the dividend size often dominates Alaskan politics. So, just to provide some more details, these cash payments have been made every fall since 1982, and they have been paid to nearly every Alaskan resident without any income, age, or work requirements. And there is marked variation in the dividend size from year to year because it is a smoothed function of the performance of the sovereign wealth fund. And because in some years, like you can see a spike there in this graph in 2008, politicians decide to add an additional amount on. But the variation ranges from about $700 in 2015 dollars to over $3,700. And I'll just remind you that this is a per capita payment. And so in many, including children, so in many years, the value of the dividend to a family of four exceeds the value of some of the centerpieces of the American social safety net, including spent money on the earned income tax credit, as well as food stamps. The dividend operates with a very low administrative burden. So there is a substantial initial application demonstrating eligibility, unless you were born in the state. And then every year after, there is an annual application period in the first quarter of the year that people can fill out online or via paper, and it is really trivial. So to reapply takes under 5 minutes. One of the key reasons why the administrative burden is so low is because fraud detection is on the onus of the state. So rather than having recipients prove that they are not defrauding the state when they apply, they attest, so they sign a document saying that I have not defrauded the state, and then it's the state's obligation to investigate any potential cases of fraud. The vast majority of dividends are distributed via direct deposit on the same day every fall. The remainder just gets distributed via check within the next 2 weeks. Alaskan government agencies can garnish PFDs to pay for outstanding fees, so child support, taxes, parking tickets, and so forth. Participation rates are similar to or greater than the federal social safety net programs. They have been falling in the last 10 years or so, but prior to that, they were well north of 90%. Now, you may be asking yourself, can teachings from Alaska apply to us? Because if you are like many of the audiences to whom I present, when you think about Alaska, you think about images like this. And that's appropriate. That is Alaska. But I'm here to partly tell you that yes, you can learn from Alaska because Alaska is much more similar to the rest of the United States than you might imagine. And part of that is because Alaska is huge. You can see here how large Alaska is compared to the lower 48 states. And Alaska includes places like Anchorage, which is a medium-sized city, very much akin to medium-sized cities elsewhere in the nation. And Alaska has extraordinary infrastructure, especially in urban areas. So, what I'm showing you a picture of here is the Native Medical Campus in Anchorage, which is a first-class, premier medical facility specifically for Indigenous Alaskans. So, let me provide a few statistics here. How similar is Alaska to the rest of the United States? Well, you can see that very similar across a whole range of different metrics, but I don't want to overstate the case. So while you can see that the share of white people in Alaska is pretty comparable to the rest of the nation, the racialized minority population skews far more indigenous than the nation as a whole, and fewer people of who are Black or African American, as well as fewer people who are Latinx or Hispanic. Also, Alaska is a rural state. So it is, it's far more of the share of Alaskans' population lives in a rural area than the nation as a whole. So a quick recap. Why am I interested in studying Alaska's permanent fund dividend? Well, we've got over 40 years of payments given to nearly every resident of the state. And the population of Alaska is over 700,000 people. So we've got this demographically diverse, large population of both urban and rural communities that have received a substantial cash payment for over 40 years. So the scale of this is extraordinary. And what it allows us to do is to identify changes that might not be detectable by statistical methods on a small scale. It also allows us to really dig into what a universal cash transfer would entail, as well as being able to look at heterogeneous effects. So whether or not the money affects different populations differently. So how can we isolate these impacts? Well, we have three sources of variation. So one source of variation is days, because most everybody gets the money on the same day. We can look at things like, are emergency visits lower before the dividend is given and higher after dividend is given? Does crime change over the course of these days? We can also take advantage of the year-to-year variation in the size of the dividend. And then because it is a per capita dividend, a per capita payment, households of different sizes get different amounts within the same year. So we can also examine that. So what have we learned? Well, we have learned that fears are largely unrealized and there are broad improvements. So let me start with the fears. There is a fear in the United States and in Alaska that people, if given unearned cash, are going to stop working. That hasn't happened. To the extent that it has happened, the effects are concentrated in women with children under age 5. So we are assuming that the additional cash allows those women to spend more time taking care of themselves or taking care of their young children, which by and large, for the people who hold these fears about a retreat from working, that is a way to spend time that they feel enthusiastic about. There's also a fear that with this influx of money, that people are going to engage in dangerous behavior. We do not find that to be the case. So in the days after the money is distributed, there is no increase in traumatic injury or in mortality. There is a decrease in property crime. There is an increase in substance use. We can discuss that more, but with the experts in Alaska, the people who work with substance use users explain these findings is that there is a population in Alaska that is addicted to a substance. And when they get this influx of money, then they use that to acquire their substances, and they can do it without committing property crimes. And then there's also an increase because they have this available money. Now let's think about the broad improvements. Lower income parents increase spending on their children. So that decreases the inequality in how families spend money on their children. So we see increases in spending on schooling, on lessons, on fun, on clothes, and on electronics. We also see broad improvements to reproductive health and autonomy. We see that in an increase in short-term childbearing, which is an indication that there was an economic barrier to parenting that is somewhat alleviated by this influx of cash. We see a decrease in miscarriages due to an improvement in in utero health. There's no impact on the abortion rate, and there's an increase in breastfeeding initiation and continuation. We also see improvements to child well-being, namely in the reductions of cases of neglect that are reported to the child welfare system. We see reductions in childhood obesity. We have some work that is in progress, and I look forward to reporting to you on it at a later date. So one is a further look at substance use. So the findings that I showed you earlier were looking at police reports. And one of the explanations for an increase in the report of substance use is that the police may have a broader presence in the days after the PFD distribution than in before. In this work, what we are doing is we are looking at a wide share of the population's self-reported substance use. We are also interested in examining the effect on foster youth's experience while they are in care and when they transition to independent living. While youth are in care, their dividends are held in a trust that is maintained by the state, and the youth can access that trust via the court system. And then if they age out of foster care and transition to independent living, on the day that they leave foster care, they get all of the money that is in the trust. We are examining a whole wide range of measures of financial well-being, including credit scores, debt delinquency, bankruptcy, and expenditures. And we are also examining migration. So does this money influence decisions to move to Alaska? So a few concluding thoughts. I promised that I was going to include some of the trade-offs and limitations. So many of the large and systemic problems that families in Alaska face cannot be solved by a few $1,000s once a year. So while we see broad improvements, none of us actually think that the hardest and deepest problems are a few $1,000 problems. Another trade-off and limitation, since 2016, the PFD is in direct competition with government services and is a focus of many political fights. Then lastly, the nature of universality means that people who receive the PFD who do not need it or benefit from it. The richest person in Alaska who owns acres and acres and a plane, and has a personal chef, they also receive the dividend, as well as the poorest person in Alaska who is struggling to make month-to-month and make things work just on a day-to-day basis or a month-to-month basis. So it's fair to ask a question whether or not those funds would be better utilized if there were additional eligibility criteria, say income requirements. But in conclusion, cash has inherent benefits. It is flexible, it's easy to administer, and it confers autonomy and dignity. The fears around unrestricted cash payments are not substantiated. We see steady employment and we see no increase in dangerous activity. And there are numerous positive effects from the annual cash transfer across a wide range of outcomes, including improvements for children as well as for adults. That being said, we are unable to compare the efficiency of this program to other programs that might uplift Alaskans. Thank you so much. And here is a short bibliography, but that concludes my study, my presentation, I should say.
Thank you, Dr. Cowan. We very much appreciate your presentation. And at this time, we will turn it over to Mr. Mark Donovan.
All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about the results of the Denver Basic Income Project, and then again talk about we want to try to move towards scale. So the Denver Basic Income Project is I'm sorry, my screen is now, is a demonstration project that's provided guaranteed income to people experiencing homelessness in Denver. We deployed $10.8 million to over 800 individuals and families. And we worked with the University of Denver's Center for Housing and Homelessness Research. They ran a rigorous randomized controlled trial. And the mission is to invest in people with cash, connection, and trust to live life on their terms. We view guaranteed income as a foundation for a just and equitable society. And we believe that a basic income costs less than the cost of poverty. We started organizing in January of 2021 and ran some trials initially to test the idea at small scale while we were raising funds. And then we launched in November of 2022, serving 807 individuals. And the program was originally designed as a 12-month intervention. And as both Dr. West and Dr. Cowan pointed out, that is insufficient. And we recognized that early on, and in retrospect would have been better off designing it with smaller number of people and a longer duration, 3 to 5 years or longer. We were able to extend an additional 8 months, but that was, I think, a design flaw. We broke into 3 cohorts. So people were randomized into 3 cohorts by the university, and we worked with 19 partner organizations who had trust-based relationships with participants and assisted us with application and enrollment and onboarding and ongoing work throughout the program. And so one group received $1,000 a month. The second group received $6,500 up front and then $500 a month for 11 months. And then the final group received $50 a month. We also provided phones and service or data or a phone stipend if somebody had their own smartphone. And at 10 months, over 45% of participants were housed. And one of the surprises of this was how well the small payment group did, and compared to the larger payment groups. And I'll talk a bit more about that. We dug into that to try to understand why that was, and we found that it had to do with that it being the cash is part of this, but the trust that's established, the hope in a better future that is created, and even the connection to services and support all tied into this. Even the phones were extremely important in terms of somebody's ability to get into housing. We also found that that it helped people move into full-time employment. As it was pointed out previously, time use is a huge implication of poverty, and we saw significant reductions in time spent accessing resources. And we also saw reductions in public service utilization. including emergency room visits, hospital nights, jail stays. All of the findings, complete findings, are available at the Denver Basic Income Project.org website on our resources tab. So I'm just covering a few of these in this presentation, and it's what we found is consistent with the hundreds of other pilots and programs that have been run in the US and around or worldwide. And it seems to us that it's common sense that if you provide cash to folks that are in need, that you're going to have these types of outcomes, and it's consistently validated. We did a mixed method study, and we spoke with and the research team did qualitative interviews as well, which added additional color to the findings. And the findings were somewhat consistent with what we expected. People were using the funds to support their immediate basic needs, to catch up on bills, especially the larger payment groups, and the larger payment groups as well, to make bigger life changes, like perhaps getting into housing or purchasing an RV or a car that could help with employment, those types of things. We also really focused on listening to our community, and we used a couple of different tools. The surveys that the researchers were doing were one way that we could hear from people on a regular basis, with the monthly and the longer form surveys that were done at 6-month intervals. But we also used a tool called Listen for Good that allowed us to query our participants about how they were feeling they were being served, and whether they were feeling that they were being respected, and how their communication was, and gave them an opportunity to tell us what they were looking for in terms of how we delivered programming and services. And we did that. I've done that for 2 years. We did it in 2023 and 2024. And based on what we heard from them, we made adjustments. We heard from folks that they wanted to build community and have more in-person events and have more face-to-face contact. And so we started to build that into our programming. And when we repeated the Listen for Good survey in 2024, the numbers went up, and our participants were even more appreciative of the way we were serving, the way we were listening to them, and sharing the findings back with them. A couple of lessons from that are here: design surveys with dignity, analyze for action, not just reporting, share findings with those you serve regularly, prioritize relationships over transactions. And this is something that we think is super important, that these programs can't be transactional. These are people, and these are relationships, and it's part of what gives people a sense of hope in a better future. Everybody has to do their own work to get to stability, to get to safety, to get to housing. But if you don't think there's a possibility for improvement, it's hard to do that work. And we found that approaching people in this way really made a difference. And then also, this is the idea that this takes time. And so listening is slow, but to slow down and take the time to connect and hear these stories and hear the needs of the community that we're serving. So we're really proud of what we achieved, but I think one of the things that we've seen across this entire movement is that we run pilots and programs, demonstrations, and have great success, and then we don't get the support to expand to scale. And this is exactly what happened in our case. We tried to convince our funders to expand and extend this even longer, or to reach more folks, because it did have such a a great impact. With the 8-month extension going out to 20 months, we saw the housing rates go up over 60%. And again, just continued really positive feedback from the community. But we did not get the funding to be able to extend further or to reach more folks. And so around the end of last year, we started to think, okay, how can we approach this a little bit differently? If if we're not going to see the type of funding that's needed to move this to scale quickly to fight homelessness, is there some other way to do this? And the Alaska model really and kind of provided us a model of what might be possible. And what's happening right now, the kind of the convergence of the criminalization of homelessness and at the same time the emergence of AI and robotics is creating a situation that is already increasing homelessness and increasing instability and is going to only accelerate. And so we believe that there is a pathway to providing a guaranteed income to, at the very least, people that are on the lower end of the economic ladder, but potentially even universally. And the Alaska model is one that we think can guide us in this, where Alaska chose to use oil and gas as their source of revenue. In the case of our current economy and the emergence of AI, data is the resource that could fund a universal cash dividend. AI is essentially built on our data, and we're not being compensated for it. I don't imagine any of you have received a check from Google or Meta or any of the other big AI companies, and they're already worth $20 trillion combined, and they're probably going to 10 or 20x over the next 5 to 10 years. So at the beginning of this year, we decided to start organizing and thinking about how could we potentially model this and do this in the state of Colorado as a demonstration at a state level. And so we held a sprint in February with about 10 or 12 organizations to see if there were others that were interested in doing this exploratory work and were willing to fund it. And we were able to put together a coalition to do 3 things: do some population modeling, create a revenue report, and do some polling. The sprint was in February, and then we started the work in March. The University of Denver, a different group, put together a population report, and it's available also on the resource tab of our website. And they showed that jumping to a universal cash dividend at the $25 a month level, $100 a month level, and $500 a month level are all incredibly expensive and would be difficult to jump straight to that. But they also showed us what some phased approaches might look like. And so if you go look at that report and study it, it's super interesting. You'll see, okay, we could do this by starting with babies, or we could have a means test where you start with some type of income threshold, or you could focus geographically and start with the poorest counties. There's a number of ways you could phase into it. You could phase in randomly 10% of the population per year to make it more manageable to step into it. We then worked with the Colorado Fiscal Institute that did a revenue report, which has not yet been released, but will be soon, that talked about the different ways you could approach this with digital ad taxes, with different ways of taxing data. There could be land tax, there could be wealth taxes. We also finally did polling, and the polling, which will also be released shortly, revealed that there is a pathway to this. Folks understand the idea that AI is built on their data and they're not getting compensated, and that it makes sense and it's fair to receive a dividend for that, for their contribution to these systems, and that these systems are going to displace jobs, and not just a few jobs. They're going to replace potentially the majority of jobs. There's and all of the tech moguls talk about the necessity of, first they were calling it universal basic income, but then they started to say maybe not universal basic income because they don't know what cash is going to mean in an economy, a post-labor economy where AI and robotics can do most jobs. And so now they're talking about universal resources or universal equity, but it's always punting it down the line. And so we're trying to see, can we do something right now? And we believe that a cash dividend today is urgent and necessary as people are losing their jobs and as financial instability rises. Maybe they're right. Maybe in the future, cash takes on a new meaning in a super abundant future if that materializes. But in the meantime, we need to do something now. And so what we're hopeful is that, and we're meeting actually today and starting to make some decisions about whether we're going to have the courage to move forward and maybe take this to the ballot in November and run a campaign to try to enact some type of cash dividend at the state level with some type of a tax on dividend and on our data. So that's the idea. There is a pathway forward. The polling shows that there's support for this, and that but there's a lack of understanding of even like the Alaska Permanent Fund, which is such a strong model of how this can be done, or even the understanding of what's coming in terms of the disruption that's on its way. But we're really proud to have be playing a part in this cash movement to show what's possible if you deliver cash to folks with dignity. And if nothing else, we should be delivering a guaranteed income to everybody that's experiencing homelessness anywhere in the world. So appreciate the opportunity again to share briefly with you what we've been working on in Denver. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. That was great, and we appreciate your comments. We are now going to take a 5-minute break, and when we return, we will hear from Dr. Moisio, Mr. Strauss, and Ms. Lee. Thank you. We are ready to get started with part 2 of our webinar, and we will be starting with Dr. Moisio. Please take it away.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you. Now I'm trying to share the presentation. Let's see, I had a bit of technical problems this morning. So yes, I'm actually approaching a slightly different angle, so to speak. I noticed, thank you for a great presentation. I really actually looking forward to the Alaska Universal citizen dividend presentation from Sarah, thank you, but also Stasia and Mark's presentation were great, very interesting. I'm perhaps more on the what I might call institutional part. So I'm presenting reforms and a kind of an institutionalized guaranteed minimum income and part of the basic income system that there is in Finland, and also kind of a show how they were preceded these large-scale pilots and experiments. But before going there, I think I will explain you briefly. So hopefully you have a classic divide describing the classic categories of social security system in Europe and United States and pretty much all around the world nowadays. Usually you have two distinct categories. You have a social insurance system, which is contributory earnings related. I think most of the countries nowadays have some sort of contributory system, usually the pension at least. And to supporting or for those who don't have a work history or right to social insurance, they usually have social assistance or safety net, some form of means tested guaranteed income for people who need more than social insurance or who are not covered by social insurance. But in a Nordic kind of a third model, which is always categorized that there is a sort of a third category between social insurance and social assistance, which is often called basic income or categorical non-contributory basic benefits, so to speak. Put in a nutshell, they are social insurance type of benefits for people who don't have a work history or who haven't gained access or right to actually contributory benefits. And the idea behind this is that by granting these categorical non-contributory basic benefits, you can actually quite effectively remove the need of means tested household level social assistance and safety nets. And Finland is perhaps a perfect example of this hybrid structure. You have the similar hybrid elements in other Nordic countries and actually many of the European welfare states too. And if you want to see the structure, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the social security and benefit structure, but it is the kind of a typical structure that you have, at least in the European welfare states. On your left-hand side, you have the classic social insurance benefits, which are usually the 5 or 6 standard social risks or life situation that access you or grant you for social insurance benefits in a case you are contributed to systems. And major main benefits is usually the earnings related pension you have. And but in many countries there is no real categorical basic benefits between social assistance and social insurance, meaning that if you don't have an access or right to social insurance benefits, the social assistance or safety net, tax-funded safety net means that safety net is the only income protection you have, unless you like I said, in European or especially in the Nordic welfare states, you have often access one or more categorical basic benefits. National pension is perhaps the most common one. National, which just means basically that after a certain age, 65, 68, you are access or entitled to national pension, flat rate national pension, which is not means tested. It's individual similar benefits than the social insurance based benefit, but it's flat rate. And you haven't contributed, you have a certain rules and limitation for your living in a country and have a legal status in a country. So that's why it's actually often called also residence-based social insurance or citizens-based social insurance. But there's also there's no kind of when granting minimum income, either as a safety net or basic benefits, you end up in another question, which is incentives to work. And this is perhaps especially the European welfare state dilemma, meaning that many European welfare states have granted quite substantial and coverage basic income and minimum guaranteed income for each person who's residing legally in the country. And in the other side of it, it means that the incentives to work, especially in the low or kind of casual work, might be low. So this is a very typical graph showing the gross wage on the x-axis and how the disposable income or net income you have. This is a one person living in a rented flat. So put in a nutshell, meaning that in Finland, especially if you live in the Helsinki area, you don't actually profit financially that much if you take a low paid work compared to being living in benefits. And this is a very standard kind of a graph you can find in a European welfare state. But the good side, of course, is that you are highly or very well protected in a case of social risks. But the reason why I wanted to solve this graph is that it shows the components of social security. And if you can watch closely, you can see that there's actually Finland and Ireland and Germany. I cannot find it. Where is it? But they have this basic income type of benefits for also for unemployed, meaning that you are right for access to basic flat rate unemployment benefits, even if you don't have any work history or you are not entitled to social insurance based benefits. And top of that, you usually have housing benefits and also some social assistance or safety net, depending on the country. And as you can see, the net household income as a share of average wage is usually around 30%, especially in the European welfare states, and it's a bit lower because it's Eastern Europe and of course in other countries. Might be I don't know if there are right figures for United States, but you probably know better than I do. So you can actually tell me more about this graph than me. So sorry, this is a quite long explanation or kind of a background for my actually topic, and it's about two national Finnish experiments because Finland is actually reform and test both the categorical basic benefits and social assistance. Meaning that in the 90s, there was actually two large pilot studies where they test how you could replace local social assistance with the national state-run model. And 20 years later, actually 5 years ago, before Corona, there was also more talk and wanted to experiment. Could we replace the categorical basic benefits with the universal unconditional benefit? And this produced the Finnish basic income experiment, which is still, if I'm not wrong, it's the only non-voluntary state-level basic income experiment anywhere in the world. So it was testing that could be replaced all of the categorical basic benefits with one universal basic benefit. And these two experiments and pilots, they have quite different outcomes. The 90s nationalization of social assistance pilots, well, the experiment was quite limited, and it was 90s. There wasn't a big movement at the time about the random-sized controlled trials and that kind of thing. So it was quite what you might say, quite limited on its scientific ambition, but it was also shaped by political compromises, and the findings were used very selectively. But in the end, it lead way to actual reform and centralization of social assistance in the state level. And in 2017, Finland made a large reform where it replaced its municipal level social assistance to a state level guaranteed minimum income, and also at the same time highly digitalized it. So that means that Finland is perhaps the most digitalized minimum income system or safety net in the world, I would say, if not the most, but at least especially the top. And the second experiment about the categorical basic incomes, the basic income experiment in 2017, it actually resulted the opposite in a way. It more or less lead to rejection of unconditional universal basic income. Because the results was that there was a quite small behavioral and well-being effects. The cost estimates were seen unrealistic. That was quite expensive to turn the categorical basic benefits into universal basic benefits. But also in this time, the findings were used very selectively, so it wasn't really yes or no kind of a thing. It was a bit of a fight over it. But the kind of a compromise is perhaps was that the universal basic income, it doesn't offer much value in a welfare state that already has extensive categorical basic benefits and covering social assistance or guaranteed minimum income system. And kind of a political outcome of the basic income experiment was that they didn't want to replace the categorical basic benefits, but they wanted to simplify them. And actually 2 years ago, they started this bigger general benefit reform to reform the categorical basic benefit system in Finland. So, then the lessons for Korea, assume that we are kind of helping Korea in some sense in here. The question is, what kind of architecture you want to have to your safety net, because you can either build it as a universal basic income system, or or stepping stone state level guaranteed minimum income. And at least I understood that these are the two options that the politics in Korea are seeing at the moment. So the Finnish experience can offer three lessons for this question. Well, first of all, is that the universalism is not a all or nothing kind of a black and white question. Basic income, they can be designed either as a universal or unconditional payment, or it can be built as a categorical non-contributory protections as a Nordic welfare state model. And the outcomes are not that different, really. And also, I think it was it Sarah who mentioned very good in her presentation that the cash alone is not necessarily enough, or at least for people who have difficulties to find a job or have their perhaps a personal life control and etc. So either if you are turning into unconditional basic income or state level guaranteed minimum income, you still need to think how you integrate the employment services, social work, and rehabilitation services into basic income or guaranteed minimum income. And the last one is that experiments, being there, very high scientific, standardized, and etc. The outcome is not necessarily predicted. So Like in Finnish experiments show that the pilot programs and experiments that they lead quite different outcomes than the original idea than we thought at the beginning when the pilots and experiments were designed. So you have to kind of acknowledge that the politics works in their own way, and scientific research and evaluation is another. But I think this is my last slide, and thank you. Hopefully you managed to follow at least some of my presentation ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moisio. That was great. We appreciate your comments and your presentation. Next up, we have Mr. Strauss presenting from Los Angeles, California.
Okay, wonderful. I'll reintroduce myself first. I'm Aaron Strauss. I work for the City of Los Angeles Community Investment for Families Department. More specifically, I'm the Senior Program Manager for our Office of Community Wealth. And before I talk about our Guaranteed Income Pilot Program, Big Leap, I wanted to share a bit more about the mission and vision of my department. So our goal is really to break the generational cycle of poverty in Los Angeles through building community wealth. And we focus on a number of policy areas that make up the entire purview of poverty within Los Angeles. And in focusing on those policy areas, we also have a number of programs to serve low-income and vulnerable Angelenos beyond guaranteed income. So that includes our Children's Savings Account program, our tax preparation services, financial coaching work, and then specific contracts with a number of local nonprofit providers that offer wraparound services to Angelenos. And the goal here really is to, align community investments and create opportunities for all Angelenos to prosper. And the philosophy of guaranteed income fits in really nicely with the mission and vision of our departments. And we believe that regardless of someone's situation, every human deserves to be able to meet their basic needs. And more pertinent to this conversation, government can and should play a key role in ensuring support for everyone, regardless of their life circumstances. As core values imbued within our guaranteed income work and really throughout the department's work, we promote dignity, trust, and collaboration. And this feeds into our approach to guaranteed income, which of course, as we know by now, is unconditional, regular, and direct. With no employment requirements, no burdensome eligibility processes, and no asset tests. So this is really the totality of our vision on poverty, how we fit into the landscape in Los Angeles of all the organizations trying to combat the generational nature of poverty. And with that, I'll get a bit more into why we established our guaranteed income program, Big Leap, in the first place. Our program goals are on the left-hand side here. We wanted to demonstrate that guaranteed income is scalable at the municipal level. A lot of wonderful nonprofits are involved in this space, and we believe that the future of guaranteed income needs to be embedded within the government, not just municipal, but also county, state, and federal. But as a first step and playing our part as the City of Los Angeles, we can demonstrate that guaranteed income is scalable at the municipal level. We also want to understand the impact of cash on a number of research domains, including community violence and intimate partner violence. We wanted to facilitate economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, and the Big Leap pilot ran starting in 2022. So really still on the back of a number of negative health and financial outcomes from the COVID-19 pandemic, especially among some of LA's most economically vulnerable families already. With that in mind, we also wanted to change the narrative around how people view poverty. I think there are a lot of misconceptions around who is poor in Los Angeles and in the United States in general, and why they're poor, and therefore what they deserve as a result from the state. So we wanted to change how people might view folks in LA who are experiencing poverty through a number of media and storytelling opportunities. And also we wanted to embed hope and dignity within social services, two values that are often very much missing when folks are interacting with faceless and nameless government institutions who don't always have the experience of the people that they serve in mind when they have designed their interventions. So those are the high-level program goals. Drilling into our goals for more of the individual participant level. Quite simply, we wanted to help people meet their basic needs and therefore disrupt poverty. We wanted to help improve their household stability, improve their physical and mental health, reduce stress and anxiety. And a little bit later, I'll get into the actual research outcomes that emerged from Big Leap in collaboration with our colleagues at the UPenn Center. So we were able to serve 3,200 treatment group participants with $1,000 per month of no strings attached financial assistance for 12 months. That's about a $38.4 million investment. And at the time, it was the largest guaranteed income pilot program launched in the entire nation. All participants had to meet these 5 eligibility criteria. One is that they had to reside within the boundaries of the city of Los Angeles because we were utilizing public funds. The second is they had to be 18 years of age or older in order to consent for the research for this pilot program. The third is that they had to have a dependent child or be pregnant at the time of application. And that's really in line with our department goals. We serve families, as the name of the department might suggest. Our goal is to address the generational nature of poverty in LA. So having this 2-gen approach was really important for us. We also wanted to serve some of the most socioeconomically vulnerable Angelenos. So as such, we required participants to have annual income below the federal poverty level for their family size. For a family of 4 back in 2022, that was approximately $25,000 a year. And I've seen estimates that it takes more like $80,000 to $100,000 a year just to sustain a family of 4 in Los Angeles. So we're talking about folks who are well below that. And then finally, as I mentioned, the goal here was also an economic recovery program on the back of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we required participants to have experienced economic or a health hardship related to COVID-19. As I mentioned, Big Leap was a research study. We partnered with the University of Pennsylvania Center for Guaranteed Income Research very proudly. Before I get into the findings there, I wanted to express who is actually part of this pilot program so we better understand the impact that we made. The average age of our participants was 38. I mentioned that the federal poverty level for a family of 4 at the time of the pilot was $25,000, but actually the families in our program made significantly less than that on an annual basis, with a mean income of under $15,000 and a median income of about $11,000. We served families, and it's no surprise that about 80% of our participants identified as female. In terms of race, about half identified as Hispanic and almost a third identified as Black. Now, for some demographic background on LA, about half of LA identifies as Hispanic. So the rate of Hispanics within our pilot program matched that of the city, but only about 8 to 9% of LA identifies as Black. So our rate of Black participants was between 4 and 5 times higher, 3 and 4 times higher rather, than the overall rate of Black people within the city of Los Angeles. Also, 2/3 of our participants were single, and many spoke languages other than English within their homes. So the canonical Big Leap participant was a single mother of color living really within Council Districts 8 and 9, which is like the historic central area of Los Angeles. And that really does match who we know to be experiencing poverty within Los Angeles. Through the financial disbursement mechanism that we utilized to distribute the $1,000 per month to our participants, we're able to see some spending data and trends that emerged here. About 2/3 of the dollars were taken out in cash. I just want to introduce that important caveat. And that is somewhat in line with other similar programs, although it's on the higher side. And we think this is because a lot of our participants were engaged in the informal economy in Los Angeles. A lot of them were paying rent in cash or used to making their purchases in cash, often are making their own income in cash. Furthermore, we know that a lot of folks coming into this program had a distrust of government and financial institutions. And when they were invited to participate in Big Leap, they thought that it was too good to be true. As such, we saw that a lot of the money was taken out in cash at the very beginning of the month, right when the funds had landed. Although we did a lot of trust building with our participants, we understand that there are these legacy issues that contribute to how the money might have been treated. Aside from that, though, about 32% of program funds spent via card swipe is trackable. It's broken down by category on the pie chart you see on the right-hand side. And the 4 most common trackable spending categories are absolute basics: food, household goods, transportation, and housing costs, and those make up more than 90% of trackable spend. So we do know through this and the qualitative and quantitative survey data that folks are really just trying to meet their basic needs. These are all, parents, mostly single mothers, who are just trying to make life better for their children. With that in mind, I wanted to get into some of our research findings. This was a randomized control trial. We had our 3,200 treatment group participants. We had 5,000 individuals invited to be part of the control group. They did not receive the guaranteed income, but they were compensated for surveys that they completed. And these surveys measured their financial well-being, mental health, physical health, emotional health, household stability, and then a couple research domains specific to Los Angeles that I already mentioned before, which include perceptions of community violence and incidents of intimate partner or domestic violence. So with all of that in mind, I wanted to highlight our great research findings here. In terms of financial well-being, our treatment group significantly increased their ability to cover a $400 emergency expense. They also demonstrated a decrease in food insecurity and an increase in other health promoting behaviors. They were able to reduce the severity and frequency of intimate partner violence that they experienced. They really focused on establishing immediate safety in the first 6 months, proximate safety in months 6 to 9, and future safety by planning for the pilot's end. And this is really in line with some of the models that our colleagues at UPenn were highlighting are consistent throughout a number of other 12 to 24-month pilots, these different phases of how folks are treating the money and using it to plan ahead. Also, in terms of parenting, treatment group parents significantly were more likely than control group parents to maintain enrichment and extracurricular activities for kids and also spend more time with them. They were more likely to report reduced fear of community violence and report more positive interactions with their neighbors. Also, a real highlight for me is that we heard anecdotally, and it emerged in the interviews that our research colleagues conducted with our participants, that a number of participants, although they themselves were well below the federal poverty level and struggling to make ends meet in a very expensive city, they nonetheless still were very generous with the funds they received on a monthly basis and were giving them out to family, to friends. We had folks who caught wind of a business in their neighborhood that was struggling and helped the proprietors of that business out. So they really were trying to spread the money among their social networks. This is a real advantage of guaranteed income being unconditional. So folks were able to see the need in their communities, not just meet their own needs, but really, act with generosity for their neighbors, their families, and their friends. And then finally, treatment group participants were more likely to secure full-time employment than to remain unemployed, not looking for work, compared to the control group. And that helps to combat some of the misconceptions that guaranteed income has a universal chilling effect on labor participation rates and on folks' drive and ability to gain part or full-time work. I want to double click on a couple of the research findings that I just covered. This is about financial well-being, more specifically emergency expense. The treatment group participants were more likely to be able to cover a $400 emergency expense, as I mentioned. As you'll see on this chart, the treatment group is tracked in blue and the control group is tracked in red. And this measures the household's ability to cover a $400 emergency expense. So you'll see as folks participated in the pilot, their ability increased and then it did not decrease. And by the end, they were about twice as likely as the control group to be able to cover a $400 emergency expense. This is a research finding on food security. The question that was asked here is, in the past 4 weeks, did you or any other household member have to eat less in a day because there was not enough food? And this demonstrates that treatment group participants were significantly less likely to report eating less food due to resource scarcity than control group participants. And that was a durable finding at the 6, 12, and 18-month marks. You'll see that control group line in red is higher than the treatment group line in blue, meaning that more control group participants not receiving the guaranteed income were food insecure relative to the treatment group. And then finally, probably the most exciting finding for me here, and one that I will get into deeper as we plan the next phase of guaranteed income in Los Angeles, is about intimate partner violence. The composite abuse scale over time is represented on the data you see on the screen, and you'll see the control group's data is significantly higher throughout the entire duration of the program and even 6 months after than the treatment group. This is showing that overall guaranteed income treatment group participants reported lower levels of total intimate partner violence scores than control participants during the entire study period. And as I mentioned, it was statistically significant at the 18th month follow-up. Our researchers highlighted the disbursement mechanism as crucial to this decreased severity and frequency of IPV, because the money in the form of a cash card was given directly to participants. So there were women who were able to kind of hide their participation in Big Leap, save up funds, and then move themselves and their children into safety, really providing that pathway for women, especially to leave unsafe relationships. There are a number of other research findings, and at the end of the presentation, I've linked to the UPenn team's library of excellent reports, including ours. But I also wanted to talk about the future of guaranteed income in Los Angeles. We continue to engage in opportunities like this to share the positive results of our program. We're part of a number of coordinating groups that try to push this practice forward, either in Southern California, throughout California, or throughout the nation. And we know the whole movement is focused on utilizing this momentum, from pilot programs to create sustainable policy and really advocate for more funding for these types of programs. With that being said, we have a number of unconditional cash programs in the pipeline within my departments, including some non-guaranteed income ones, but I really want to focus today on our program that we are about to launch, serving transition age youth and survivors of intimate partner violence. As you saw, it was a crucial finding from Big Leap that survivors were able to escape abusive relationships. And our city council was very interested in this finding. They asked us to come back with program design that would partially serve survivors and also transition age youth, which are 18 to 25-year-olds, often experiencing a number of intersecting issues that contribute to poverty and housing instability, such as being in foster care, incarceration, being part of the LGBTQ population. So our goal is to support these two pilots. It won't be a $38 million investment this time. We have about a $2 million disbursement budget. And with that, we'll be able to support approximately 40 participants from each of those groups, from the transitional aged youth and the survivors of intimate partner violence. In contrast to Big Leap, which was $1,000 a month for 12 months, this program will provide $24,000 over 24 months and offer participants the option between two payment structures. One will be 24 even monthly payments of $1,000 a month, and the second will be a lump sum payment of $6,000 followed by 18 months of $1,000 per month. And that's really in recognition of what we were hearing from community as we designed this pilot, from both staffers and from folks with lived experience, that there could be situations where a lump sum payment is beneficial, especially at a moment, for example, if a survivor is moving out of their transitional housing and is looking for permanent housing, if they need to be able to afford first month, last month rent, and a security deposit, saving up $1,000 a month for several months might take too much time, and safety is a real issue for them. So the lump sum payment might facilitate some of that stability. And to streamline access to this program, we're trying to reduce the eligibility criteria to be very simple. We just want folks to live in the city of LA, be 18 years of age or older, and then have an existing relationship with one of our predetermined community-based organizations that exists within our city network, already serving these populations. And by the nature of having that relationship, they'll be eligible for the program. And through those organizations, in addition to other relationships that we have as a department, we'll leverage departmental, city, and county resources to provide additional crucial services like navigation with housing, financial coaching, education, access to safe and low-cost banking products, job training and placements, and more. So we're really excited to launch this program in the next couple of months to continue to make a difference in the lives of some of these very vulnerable populations. And with that, I will end my time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Strauss. That was great, and we appreciate your presentation. Our last presentation of the webinar is from Ms. Lee, and so I will hand it over to her now.
Okay, so as Seoul's 3-year guaranteed income pilot, Stepping Stone Income has officially come to an end last month, and I would like to share how the city is working to support participants beyond the pilot and ensure a soft landing. And before I explain why we initiated the project, I'd like to briefly go over the current state of the existing system and why change is needed. As you can see, the National Basic Livelihood Security System, known as MBLSS in Korea, was designed to guarantee a minimum standard of living for low-income citizens. And however, it has clear limitations in responding to today's complex challenges such as job loss and growing income inequality. In particular, the eligibility criteria based on both income and assets are complicated, and strict rules like converting assets into income make it difficult to expand coverage. Even when support is provided, the benefit levels are often too low to lift people out of poverty, leaving many in blind spots of the welfare system. Because of these challenges, there has been increasing debate over how to improve the system. And as part of the discussion, Seoul proposed the stepping stone income as a possible alternative. And the goal of the Seoul Stepping Stone Income Project is to provide a meaningful income support to those in need. And our first goal is accessibility. The eligibility is based solely on income and wealth, and there is no complicated asset to income conversion. This makes the process much simpler for applicants. And the second goal is to strengthen support. We offer higher and more inclusive benefit levels compared to the Korea's national welfare system, so more households can receive meaningful assistance. And finally, our third goal is to remove work requirements. So support continues even if someone loses their job or becomes ill, providing peace of mind during unstable time. So to provide you briefly of the overview of SSIP, unlike the national security system, which uses complex criteria, the Stepping Stone project eligibility is based simply on 2 factors: household income below 85% of the standard median income and property below 326 million Korean won. And this makes the qualification process much simpler. And our pilot started in July of 2022 and was carried out in 3 phases, gradually expanding the eligible population and support. It officially ended in June 2025, which was last month. So over the 3-year pilot, we observed several key findings and positive shifts. First, we can find self-sufficiency was strengthened compared to the national security system. The exit rate from support for second-year participants was 8.6%, which is 3.8 percentage points up from the first year. This higher exit rate demonstrates that SSIP is effectively serving as a stepping stone toward independence. Additionally, 31.1% of treatment group experienced an increase in earned income. Second, among non-working households, the rate of starting work after receiving SSIP was 3.6 percentage points higher than in the control group. And finally, from a long-term perspective, we saw increased investment in human capital and future preparedness. Households receiving SSIP spent 72.7% more on education and training compared to the control group, and their savings were 11.1% higher. So unlike the existing system, which reduces benefits based on asset conversion to income, our project does not count assets against benefits and encouraging greater savings. Although we did observe positive outcomes over the 3 years, there were some concerns among recipients towards the end of the payment period. We discovered this during a meeting we hosted in April between the mayor of Seoul and the recipients, where they shared their difficulties firsthand. They experienced expressed worries that it'll be hard to make ends meet once the support ends. And they urged that we don't just send a letter by mail providing which service is available. We need active and meaningful follow-up support from the city. So it really hit us hard, and we could feel their desperation. And this highlights the urgent need for soft landing. So we dig into the numbers. We wanted to find more evidence in the admin data to see the current status. And as of April 2025, out of a total 2,076 households in the treatment group, only about 18% were able to transition and continue receiving government support after our payment ended. And the remaining 1,556 households were deemed ineligible for the national security system and faced the risk of losing all support once the program ended. And what's more concerning is that among these ineligible households, 228 households had reported zero income for the past 3 consecutive months. These numbers made it clear to us that short-term cash support is not enough, and due to unstable employment and heavy caregiving responsibilities within households, low-income status can persist even after the program. So to ensure long-term self-reliance, we recognize the urgent need for broader support, including access to job training, care services, asset building, or other integrated services. So after learning about the risks and hearing directly from participants, we have developed a next step strategy to provide continued support beyond SSIP. This follow-up policy is grounded in 2 key goals. First, to act on the concerns and requests voiced by participants during and after the experiment. And second, to prevent newly emerging crises among those at risk of falling through the cracks once the payments end. So rather than simply offering temporary aid, we aim to connect people with long-term opportunities for stability and self-reliance. And we designed a new support structure that transitions from just a cash benefit to needs-based tailored service. So first, to understand the needs of households wishing to receive continued support after the program ended, we conducted a basic needs survey targeting a total of 5,603 households, including both treatment and control groups. So the survey results, as you can see, showed that approximately over 50% households expressed a desire for follow-up support. The most frequently selected areas of need were economic issues, housing, health concerns, and employment issues. So to look into more closely at the details by sector in the economic category, there was high demand for connections to local welfare resources, financial counseling, and retirement planning support. And for housing, many households requested assistance with rental housing access. And for employment, people addressed that their interest in job placement services. So we came up with a tailored service system design. Based on the prior basic needs survey, we send a list of households requesting follow-up services to the relevant district offices, and then the district conduct home visits and initial counseling sessions with these households. And following this, a case review meeting is held to classify households into 2 groups: those needing short-term support through service matching and those requiring long-term integrated case management. For households suitable for short-term intervention, we connect them with the existing services, covering areas such as employment, housing, caregiving, and other existing services we have. And these households are then continuously monitored through quarterly follow-up visits and interviews. And for the households requiring mid to long-term intervention are designated as targets for integrated case management by the district. They receive tailored support through coordinated public and private welfare benefits and services. These households typically have complex needs and difficulty finding solutions on their own. So through ongoing counseling and resource matching, we plan to support their problem solving and promote their independent social adaptation. Specifically, we plan to prioritize job placement for the 228 households who have reported zero income over the past 3 months. Among those wishing to receive follow-up support, we will first identify households with the capacity and motivation to work. Through this, we aim to help them secure stable employment and build a foundation for self-reliance. So here are the key matching programs. And after service matching is provided for both short-term and long-term groups, each district office conducts quarterly monitoring. During this monitoring process, some complex cases may arise that are difficult to manage through integrated case management or service matching, making it challenging for district offices to intervene effectively on the ground. In such situations, we have the crisis case response consulting team within the Seoul Welfare Foundation to strengthen on-site responsiveness and professional expertise. These consulting team consists of social welfare officers with over 15 years of experience in welfare administration, as well as experts in fields such as suicide and mental illness, alcohol use disorder, hoarding, dementia, social isolation, domestic violence, child abuse, elder and disability abuse. So they provide specialized advice on challenging welfare crisis cases that are difficult to resolve locally. Additionally, the Welfare Foundation will conduct training programs for district level team leaders to further enhance their capacity and effectiveness in the field. So, so far I've shared how we have designed the follow-up support plan and guided by a commitment to build a sustainable and compassionate welfare system. Now, I want to talk about the broader direction we need to take moving forward for lasting support. So first, responsible transition. The design after policy experiment ends is more important than its start, and the end marks new beginning, continuing as a policy effort through post-support. And second, improving policy reach to vulnerable groups outside the system. I think it is crucial to establish proactive policy infrastructure that identifies and supports those who fall outside the current safety net. Third, the public commitment to policy integration. Seoul's model, we aim to answer key question, which is how do we respond after the pilot ends? And lastly, future tasks, including reviewing and ensuring the sustainability of public assistance through needs-based services that build a stepping stone for lasting support. So based on these directions, Seoul is committed to building a welfare system that will continue to support the lives of its citizens well beyond the stepping stone income pilot. And as we face ongoing challenges and changes, we will keep listening closely to the voices from the field and strive to create meaningful and practical change. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. That was wonderful. And thank you to all of our panelists. Today, we've heard about a number of cash transfer programs and associated studies from around the world. We are now going to close out our time together with a question and answer segment. I'd like to pose the first question to the researchers on our webinar. What is the next set of critical research questions that the field of guaranteed income and other cash transfers needs to answer? Let's hear first from Dr. West, followed by Dr. Cowan, and then Dr. Moisio.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. I tend to think that these questions have become obvious from our colleagues' presentations here. I think all of us spoke about the questions that we have about duration and dosage. And then additionally with whether or not a universal approach is most effective, or if a means-tested approach may be more effective to sort of maximize the outcomes for specific groups. But in addition to that, I think there are a number of questions that can be leveraged through matching and pairing of administrative data so that we can understand how guaranteed income or unconditional cash interacts with a number of different welfare systems, ranging from reentry systems to child welfare to health, human services, and education. Thank you.
I want to echo Dr. West's response. I'd also say that I think it's unlikely that we are going to be in a political environment in which we can fund a universal basic income in the way that many of us would appreciate. And so the targeting to specific populations, I think is going to be what's likely moving forward, in which case the relative impact of this money on different populations is going to be most important. And I think that, in the face of a political reality in which we're not going to have the funds necessary, I think that's going to be the most pressing question. And then the other question is a macroeconomic one, which is about inflation. And what happens to prices when there's a huge influx of money? It's a question that I get asked all the time. It's one I can only partially answer with the data that are available in Alaska. But as we can see in the United States, inflation is something that's really serious, and it's one that we can't ignore, especially for low-income families.
Yeah. Is it me? Hi, then. Thank you. Thank you for very good presentations. And before going to the research question, I think the one issue hasn't been brought up, perhaps not enough, is the big question of individual or household level benefits. I mean, you can have a universal or means tested, but one of the big question is that how the means testing or income testing is done. Is it individual in a way, or is it categorical, or is it household level? So there's a big difference. We're talking about guaranteed minimum income or safety nets that are more limited in their income testing, an individual or small, the nuclear family or the broad family, meaning that. So that's the one question that we have to address, I guess. The other question is, I think we need to look into more on finance of either basic income or guaranteed minimum income. Even if we think about the universal income and financing it through taxation, that means that it's a massive reform on taxation. I mean, universal basic income is more of a reform of taxation of the benefit system, because you are taxing it back. So it's a massive question in that. But in general, I think we should look and do some comparative study more. I mean, all of the nations, being they're developed or developing and middle income or high income countries, they all face eventually at least more or less similar social questions and social risks. And like I mentioned, that social insurance, social assistance combination has been kind of a standard, but there's a many variations. So I think we should do more comparative research and peer-to-peer learning on other countries, how other countries have solved these similar issues and what kind of guaranteed minimum income systems or basic income systems they have. So I think that's at least on the research side. Thank you.
Thank you. The second question is for the practitioners on our call. What are your next steps as your GI pilots have concluded or are starting to end? Let's start with Mr. Donovan, followed by Mr. Strauss, and then end with Ms. Lee.
What's next is a race against time. We're at a pivotal moment. AI is exploding in value, built on the data we all generate every day. But if we don't act now, that value will be captured entirely by a handful of corporations and investors. There's a narrowing window to make the case that this wealth belongs, at least in part, to the public, to the people. We have a chance to create a new kind of dividend, one that ensures benefits of technology are shared. But the longer we wait, the harder it gets. What's next isn't just a policy idea, it's a decision about who the future economy is for.
I'll jump in. I really love Mark's answer. Mine will be a bit more tactical. I already spoke to our plans to run a follow-up program in LA. We know that this intervention works. So really now it's a function of understanding the resources at our disposal as a municipal government and targeting those resources accordingly. As I noted, the specific pilots we picked now are because they are in our wheelhouse to serve. We have a survivor services team within my department, so we have ties to nonprofit partners that are already, housing and feeding women who escaped abusive relationships. Furthermore, the research from our original pilot, Big Leap, showed that this intervention works specifically for these particularly vulnerable populations. So again, the goal is always to add to the growing body of research. I don't think we'll be surprised that providing unconditional cash to very vulnerable populations who are prioritizing their safety and housing stability will have a positive effect. But I'm just grateful that the city is staying within the conversation and determining, given a finite amount of resources, which subpopulations to prioritize. Thank you.
So we are now exploring the possibility of an alternative income security model for Seoul and building on the lessons from the pilot we just ended. And we're currently conducting research on how this model could align with the existing system and looking into ways to phase in a more tailored and responsive approach. And we hope it becomes the beginning of a broader structural shift, one that recognizes how people's lives are changing and adapt accordingly. Also, I'm happy to share that we'll be sharing the full results from the past 3 years, along with our policy reflections and ongoing questions at the International Forum this December. And the final report of the project will be released in December 2026. So we hope you'll stay engaged as we work toward a more inclusive income security system in Seoul. And with that, I'll hand it over back to Allison. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you to all of our panelists for your time and information shared today. This was a wonderful webinar, and this concludes our webinar today. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you very much.